What's the date today? 15th?
15th.
5 days left. Oof. And it is Wednesday, correct? Yes. Jesus. Hi there, folks. Dan Footer with Caliber Magazine and your episode of Gunvote for Wednesday, September 15th. That means there is just 5 days left before we all find out who our next year leader will be, if it will be Erin O'Toole or Justin Trudeau. I believe Phil actually is obviously back joining us again, but he wanted to dive into the polls, so I'm going to leave it. Actually, before we get into that, we'll plug the pluggables. Phil from Canadian Tactical Cowboy Supplies, so if you want to support his participation / quasi co-hosting during this election coverage, head over to, what is your website, Phil?
ctcsupplies.ca. All your
There you go.
fun accessories online.
All your gun stuff that you'll need. And for us, that's calibermag.ca/subscribe, where you can get a 6-issue subscription for $30. That'll be shipped directly to your door. Lots of good stuff. Next issue, I think a couple Keltec reviews, and a bunch of other stuff that we're working on that'll be pretty interesting. So, but that's all besides the point. We're here to talk about the election. Phil, polls. You wanted to talk about polls.
So I think the last time I was on here was last Thursday after the evening of the English debate, and I think I mentioned,
so, yeah.
And I think I mentioned basically, right, that nobody really make a judgment about what happened with the English debate until kind of Tuesday or Wednesday, and I think I was right. If we saw over the weekend, we saw basically the Liberals continue to go up a little bit, and then everybody panicking. And then as of kind of Tuesday and Wednesday, the daily started to shift down for the Liberals, and the Conservatives kind of move up. And it's still a little bit early, but I want to say, but that's kind of reflective of how polling works, right? Polling really only shows shows basically the trend of what's happening kind of no more than kind of 3 days ago, right? That the effect of what happened three days ago, right? That doesn't really show up until kind of day 3. So day 3 or day 4. So Tuesday, Wednesday, we're in Wednesday. We're starting to see the effect of I think you mentioned that Erin won the English debate. I think he did well. I don't think he did a slam dunk, and I think that's reflective of the polls last night, today, and the day before, where we are seeing a slight kind of horse race with Erin kind of pushing ahead. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think I'll clarify by saying that I don't think Erin O'Toole necessarily... I mean, I think he won the debate in much the same way that someone has to win a race. It doesn't necessarily mean that you ran it ideally. I think it's not surprising, and that does sort of track. I've heard a lot of people start referencing some of the recent U.S. election results, not in the scary ooga booga orange man bad way that I've sort of been expecting, but more in the way of could this be an election in Canada where we see a divergence between what we'll call the common knowledge and the polling, and what we might actually see come out on election day, which we've discussed with regards to. Conservative reticence to answer the phone is a thing that pollsters might discuss. Reticence to answer positively to questions about conservatism is an ongoing trend. But I think it's undeniable there's been a momentum change. I mean, from the debate moving forward, right up to, and I know I banged on about it forever yesterday, but his treatment of Dita Garcia in that interview was like, that was straight. It This morning I was talking to Courtney about it, and I said it made me think immediately of the groping incident at the beer festival in like 91 or whatever, where he said that, if he'd known that she worked for a national newspaper, he never would have been so forward. And then I watched him speaking down to this Global News reporter, who here in BC, Global News is, I believe, our top-rated news agency. They're definitely like kind of my favorite news agency, and I've watched them a lot. And to watch him talk down to Dita Garcia in a way that I thought, like, it came across the mannerisms and the emotion in his voice. It came across like he was talking to like a high school newspaper reporter. Like, wait, stop! I'm gonna let you finish, but like, what? Like,
this is what I really want to
who
talk
do you think
about.
you are?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's nuts. So I think the momentum has shifted so much. And I think also, too, the very fact that he arrived at that situation where he was forced to say, wait, I'm going to let you finish. It doesn't, that's not Trudeau in 2015. That's not Trudeau in 2019. And I think what you're seeing in the polls and what you're referencing now in the day-to-days, I think is reflexive more of that sentiment shifting than the aggregate poll results of 3-4 day roll-ups will necessarily showcase. I mean, you got to think like 2015, the day after the election, Trudeau made headlines for walking through, I believe it was a Montreal subway station, and shaking people's hands and doing the whole "Hey, happy days, sunny ways" kind of thing throughout the subway station. And today he can't even host an event for all the protesters yelling over him. So,
well, I mean, he did hold a 500-person event in Brampton inside with a lot of seniors.
Yeah, Jean Chrétien. Let's take an 86-year-old former prime minister and a 100-year-old
mayor,
political pundit in a room.
Mississauga,
just packed.
I guess COVID is over for the Liberal Party.
And that, like, just as a bit of an anecdotal aside, so, as Phil knows, and some of you listening might know, like, we have a 1-year-old son. He just had his birthday this weekend. We now know he's allergic to peanuts. Not deathly so. Like, he didn't, he got a little bit and had some hives, but new parents, we panicked. We go to the hospital. I get told I have to leave. You're only allowed one parent in with a child at a time because of COVID. And I got to say, like, seeing Trudeau campaign in hospitals after being told that, like, a few months ago, and then seeing him in that Brampton Hall, like, there are words that I would use to describe how I feel about those that would make this podcast no longer monetizable, I suppose. Not that it's anywhere close to that, but nonetheless, it's disgusting, in my opinion.
So, just quickly to bring us back to polls, and I noticed this on your comments of some on the comments on the Caliber Facebook page when we talk about polls and you talk about predictions and everything like that. Polls aren't crystal balls, right? Polls are not reflective of what's going to happen and what the final result is going to be, right? And let's be honest, right? Polls are businesses, and polls have an agenda. Polls have biases. So let's take a look at what's happening in the polls. It gives us a good snapshot of kind of what's going on. But I mean, with a single day's poll isn't really good information, right? You want to kind of look at all of them, and you kind of want to look at the trends, and you also kind of have to take a look and know that certain polls have certain biases, right, before they actually really, really start to make sense, right? So I know there's a lot of doomers here that are basically, gun doomers who are basically saying, "Oh, it's all over, right? Blah blah blah, right? So, why should we even go to the polls, right? Because it's going to be a Trudeau minority, blah 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 blah, right?" There's certain things that polls don't capture, right? And the key one here, and I think what is especially important for this election, is turnout, and how engaged Trudeau voters, Liberal voters, and NDP voters, and Conservative voters are going to go out to the poll, right? Who are actually going to show up on election day, right? We've seen a 20% increase of advance turnout of advance polls over the weekend, right? That was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I hope you all went out and voted, right? Yes, which is a significant amount, right? But it also shows that what's going to happen on E-Day, right? On next Monday, right? If we kind of expect those numbers, right? What does that say? Does that say people want change? Are people still worried about COVID, and they wanted to avoid the crowds, or are Liberal voters super engaged and super want to support their guy and are showing up at the polls really early, right? Or is it everybody else showing up saying that they want change and voting early and voting conservative, voting conservative or voting NDP so that they can get Justin Trudeau out? Ground game here in British Columbia, just from what I'm hearing, is basically that BC is really, really, really bad for the Liberals, right? Riding level.
Oh yeah, we've not had. So we've had the Conservatives knocking on our door. We've not seen any other party, and to be quite clear, for those that don't know, the ground game is very specific. So where you are, not only in a riding, not what riding you are, but also what area of a riding you're in will dictate whether or not someone knocks on your door and stuff, because they target areas, right? I happen to live in a downtown area. It typically is in an area the Conservatives canvass. So when the Conservatives are knocking on my door in a federal election, it tells me that they think they're doing okay. They think this is an area that they need to spend time on because they think there are votes to be had here. And when you think things are closer in a riding like mine, you don't spend the effort. You go to the known areas and you concentrate on those. And I think that's, to your point about ground game in BC, the very fact that Trudeau is in BC still campaigning with 5 days left, A, tells you BC's a battleground. B, tells you he's not confident here. So, I mean, if we've got good ground game,
The polls, it's really interesting because the polls are telling one story, but the other tactical things which the central campaigns are doing are telling a different story, right? Where is Trudeau going, right, during these last few days, right? Because that's called the tour, right? The leaders' tour is incredibly expensive and incredibly important about talking about strategy, right? They're literally flying, thousands of kilometers, spending thousands and thousands of dollars in jet fuel to go to specific places so that they can bump up the polls, right? The last week, Trudeau has been in what we've been calling defensive ridings, right? He's been going to, 2015, 2019, considered, fairly strong liberal ridings, and he's going there, but he's not going to offensive ridings. So he's not been going to conservative or NDP ridings where he thinks he can win. That's really interesting, right? Because all the polls that we've been talking about, it's neck and neck, right? With the Liberals maybe slightly ahead, and all the predictors and all the polls have been saying that it's going to be a Liberal minority. But the Leaders' Tour has basically said that he's on the defensive, right? He's trying to protect himself from losing considerably, traditional Liberal seats. So what does that mean, right? Are the polls lying to us, or are the polls not capturing something, right?
And I would say there, I don't think, I would hope that this time next week we're talking about how the polls either got it wrong, and I think more to your point, gun owners, because I'm going to get into that doomer point that you raised. Gun owners got to recognize these polling companies are companies. They don't do this out of their kindness of their heart. This isn't a public service. This isn't provided to you, the taxpayer, as a benefit of citizenship. These companies are paid by political entities pretty much expressly. Once in a while, a news entity will pay them, but those are less common. And you better believe that in these situations, they game the polls in such a way that it's not just about the polls showing a result that a client may want. It's also about a poll that may galvanize or catalyze energy or effort in a given area. So they may poll a certain way because there's very much gamesmanship that occurs in polling of, you may not want to be in the lead going into the final week because the lead position is the one that all the journalists are coming for. So there's a lot that's gone on here. Overall, I think gun owners really should probably reconsider a bit of the doom and gloom, only because when you kind of take a bit of the temperature of the room, it doesn't feel like the stage is set for a Liberal majority per se. Just when you think about your social circles, I don't see a majority of people saying, I can't wait to go and elect Justin Trudeau, in much the same way that, to be totally frank, my same social circles did in 2015. Believe it or not, I have a lot of friends that have nothing to do with guns, and for a lot of them, they thought that was the way to go. And a lot of them they're either staying home or they're voting for someone else, literally those same people. So I think we all know those. But more to the point that I wanted to get to is gun owners also have to think about the reality of what's going to happen here. And what I mean is what will happen, not what could. Regardless of who wins. Okay, so one of two things is going to happen. The Liberals or the Conservatives will win. It'll happen in September. That'll be that. In both cases, because of COVID, because of the economy and all that, there's going to be a bit of a reset factor that occurs. It's going to cause delays. Neither of those governments will likely want to make firearms their first issue of business, simply because it probably won't be a priority. The Liberals may make it more of a priority than the Conservatives because it's been such a key promise in their campaign. And if they don't feel like they have room to grow or maneuver on other files, they may just sort of tread water with guns. Well, it makes, make busy work. But I don't know how likely that is. If the Conservatives win, it's less likely because they won't want to come right out of the gate and go, yeah, no, actually, first thing we're going to do, exactly what the gun lobby said. So realistically, you've probably got a fall session. and then a spring session next year before we start seeing things start to move. And in the spring session, that movement will likely, if it starts to move in the spring on guns, that will likely be the form of the beginning of committees and documents being prepared and studies that may take the remainder of the spring session. Probably minor work over the summer, and then by fall we might start to see something tabled. And by that I mean legislation, because if they are going to do a classification review, if they want to reclassify all those firearms, they will need to do it by legislation. They will not be able to reclassify every gun in Canada by OIC. That will cause a confidence motion, and that will trigger another election. So they'll go to legislation in the fall, potentially, trying to work it through with some sort of coalition for a minority position. And this would be legislation pro or anti-gun. It's just going to be in the fall, most likely, of next year. But next fall, we're into this government for 12 months. And if this is another minority, what's the clock on this? I mean, the average government, the average minority in Canada lasts 400 and some days, 450 something days. We're there. By the time legislation is starting to even hit first, maybe second reading in the House before it gets anywhere near Senate committees, anything like that, we're already hitting the 18-month mark on another minority government, most likely. So, and then you throw into that the added kind of wrench in the works that is the OIC injunction, because that effectively parks everything, which is something that I don't think we've discussed on this, and I wanted to for some time, so I'll take a couple minutes now, is basically the OIC case ensures that the gun ban of May 1st is, quote unquote, before the courts instead of government. What that means is the government can't actually do anything about it. The government is the, quote, the respondent in this case, or what we would call a defendant more often. The defendant can't drop a case. That would kind of be silly if the police were like, well, we're going to charge you with this. And you'd be like, well, I want to drop that case. You would be like, well, that doesn't work that way. So the government can't just drop it. It requires the plaintiff, i.e. the people that brought the case, the CCFR, Wolverine, Ryan Stacey, all the claimants there, they'll have to drop it. If they don't, it stays before the courts, which could be a good tactic to basically keep this before the courts in the case of a Liberal government to see how much time we can run out, or if we have a positive result. But the OIC may also put pressure on the Liberals to act, right? If they get a good result out of the OIC and all of a sudden those guns come back, it may suddenly trigger Bill Blair and Justin Trudeau to go, no, we're going to legislate immediately. And that may push this whole timeline forward. So it's not quite doom and gloom, because the most likely outcome is that whatever government is formed doesn't go near a lot of this stuff for a little bit. And unfortunately, it probably won't be a government for all that much longer. So we might be looking at a bit of a stable situation for at least the next year or so, with potentially positive outcomes coming from the court case. Who knows? But obviously the big thing is making sure that we don't have to deal with the eventuality of what Bill Blair might want to do if the courts decide that the OIC was illegal. So vote. 5 days left. Go volunteer. Go vote. Go do what you got to do. Check your local polls. Phil, you want to wrap up? We're at 18 minutes, so we still got about 2 before we run up against the clock. But
I just want to bring up, for those of you not in British Columbia, Christy Clark called an election in 2017. And in the British Columbia election, she won the most seats, right, with 43 seats. It was a minority. John Horgan of the NDP won 41 seats, so it was a 2-vote difference, and then the Green Party's held a 3-seat, basically held the balance of power. So Christy Clark tried to govern for a good 4 months before there was a confidence motion, right? As her right is to do so, right? Is basically she believed she had the confidence of the BC legislature, governed as such, right, until the first confidence motion where she was voted down. So could we see a similar situation? I think it's very possible, right? Whether it's the Conservatives who win more seats or the Liberals win more seats, right? You know, say, for example, hypothetically, Justin Trudeau wins the plurality of seats on Monday, right? He conceivably can still govern until the first confidence motion, which actually may not be until the spring, right? There's no need to actually call the House back into session until the spring, right? So nothing changes until the spring, and then we could see a confidence motion, depending on how the seat count is, right? It could only require, the Bloc or the NDP to vote against the confidence motion, and we could be in an election again, right? We conceivably could be in an election situation again in the spring of 2022, right?
And I don't think that's outlandish. Not with the problems facing, because there is a very valid point. I mean, this election is complete BS. It's malarkey, to be quite clear. He wanted a majority, and he thought he had a chance to get one. I also think that he knew that if he waited too long, inflation, economic situation would worsen, and his chances would get worse. But there's a very real question of mandate here, because the next government will have to answer some very serious and significant questions with regards to Canada's future and place on the global stage. We're seeing a vacuum of power that used to be occupied by the West and America. That is sort of, as those spheres of influence contract, we're seeing more Asian influence, and Canada has obviously been a key component in that. Anyone that's read Willful Blindness or any of the work around the money laundering and Chinese influence in Canada will know. I mean, the Meng Wanzhou trial is such a good case of that. So someone's going to need a strong mandate, and I think it's interesting that you bring up the Christy Clark election, because I think that's just one of many examples of how Canadians typically reward governments that try and win, get a minority, try and govern, lose, try and get a majority, lose. They don't get rewarded for that kind of action. So I think, my immediate reaction would be if Justin Trudeau wins a slim majority, or minority rather, that would be a very unstable government that I wouldn't expect. I mean, I didn't expect this government to last as long as it has, but I think COVID has given it a little bit of extra runway just by virtue of emergency powers. But I wouldn't expect even the next one to last even this long. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I would expect the next Liberal government that they tried to table to win the next campaign, even if they had someone like Chrystia Freeland heading them up. I know a lot of people put a lot of faith in her or Mark Carney. But I mean, a lot of people put a lot of hope in Michael Ignatieff as a real smart guy too. I don't know if Mark Carney running these Liberals and we end up voting again in March. I don't know if a lot of people will be casting a Liberal ballot at that point, regardless of who's leading that party.
Exactly. I think we're looking at kind of a what our Liberal 2004 situation with Paul Martin, right? Very very similar situation with minority government. Stephen Harper 2006, right? Stephen Harper 2008, right? Minority governments only last 24 months, so we won't see. I don't think we'll see another Conservative leadership race, even if it is a Liberal minority. I think if
Please God, no. Just, no.
I think
just let us have one for a bit.
For a bit, right? I mean,
unless Rhoda wants to come back. If Rhoda wants to come back, then we'll call it. Let's just have this
my
stuff right away.
My shout out to Rona and James Moore to come back to the Conservatives, and please come back.
No, I've softened on Erin. I'll admit, my very much angry rant-filled. He stabbed us in the back. I'm starting to see a little bit more of the strategy and the gamesmanship that I liked in the leadership race. So
yeah, my final message is basically stay the course. Right, 5 days left. The polls are at this point in time with the margin of error completely meaningless. Please don't throw your vote away with the PPC. Right? I mean, sure, you may love freedom, but do you really love Justin Trudeau more?
Yeah, there's worthless polling. Like the polls are worthless, but when you're polling at 4%. That's not a statement of worthless polling. You're not actually polling at 80%, and the polls just aren't capturing that. No, you might be polling at, oh my God, maybe 5%, which still probably puts you below the block, even in places like Alberta.
Exactly.
So it's just not going to. They won't win. They're not. They might win both, maybe. But to put in perspective, of all of the parties, they're the only party, I think, that is expected not to win their seat. I think the Greens even are like, maybe she'll win, and she's trying to win in Toronto.
No, so
isn't she?
Yeah. Well, no, because Elizabeth Bay will hold her seat in Sandwich Gulf Islands. Right?
Yeah,
that's the only seat that they will probably win. They may hold on to John Manley's seat, the Manley seat in Nanaimo, but even that's on the cusp. Anna May Paul will not win Toronto Centre. Sorry. It just won't.
But crazy Lizzie May will win more seats than the PPC will win.
Exactly.
And she said that Omar Khadr had more class than Harper's entire friggin' cabinet. Exactly. So she'll win her seat. The PPC won't win a single seat. That should tell you what you need to know about the PPC's viability as both a party and as a potential government. I mean, I don't understand why anyone would want their representative in government to be someone that works for a party that hasn't had an election yet.
Exactly.
Like, I don't understand that. It's fundamental. Like,
The Maxime
you
Bernier,
vote for your leader.
The Maxime Bernier vanity project will probably cost the Conservative government and gun owners upwards of probably 10 seats, maybe even 20 seats, right? And
So you're talking that could be the case where we're talking about a Conservative majority. In which case, everything that we just said about how long it could take and spring delays and elections would be out the window. You give a majority, we got 4 years of stability. Everyone can breathe a deep sigh of relief, and everything goes very different. Everything is it's a changing government, and that's what the PPC is potentially putting at risk. Hence why we keep bringing it up, because it's frustrating as hell.
Yes, exactly. It's like yelling at a wall, yelling at clouds, right? So. All you
People just, I think, basic on a fundamental level, people need to accept that political change is incremental in nature. 150 plus years of Canadian democracy and two parties have won, the Tories and the Grits. At some point in Canada's history, it is an inevitability that a third party will win, because in this universe, if something is possible, it will eventually happen. It ain't happening this year, and it's probably not happening in the next election. And I can tell you that what isn't helping it happen in the next election is this all or nothing this year or no year attitude. Stop trying to build your party during an election campaign, and you might actually have a party that people will want to vote for during a campaign. It's ridiculous. I mean, Max disappears for months at a time, taking his $104,000 a year salary, and then pops up the second they drop a writ with a whole bunch more fundraising, and I guarantee you, he will fucking disappear again. The second, on the 21st, poof, Maxime Bernier will just cease to exist again. He'll disappear. His paychecks will still be getting cashed, believe that, but he won't be around. He's not going to be there holding Trudeau's feet to the fire and making him accountable. With what? No one's even going to take his phone call.
Exactly.
Hi, Global, it's Maxime Bernier. I'd like to do an interview. No. We're covering the curling glockenspiel or whatever the hell they call those things. Like, it's anything is better content than Maxime Bernier content after the election. So it's just, I get it. I get that people are frustrated, and I absolutely hate to rag on a party this bad, because I love choice and I love democracy and I love elephant parties and pirate parties and all those kinds of things. But
so the final
K31 holds 6 rounds right now. If I have to weld it, I'll be so choked.
So the question to our PPC listeners: if Maxime Bernier does not win any seats in this election, will there be a leadership review?
Will anyone care? Will there be a party? I mean, you have to wonder too. I mean, if I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah. If this election had gone very poorly for the Conservatives, I do feel like there would have been an opportunity for the PPC or potentially the Maverick Party to gain legitimacy through pirating a few seats. I really thought they would have had a chance to get someone like a Michelle Rempel-Garner type character in as a real totem for a party like the Mavericks or the PPC, to say, like, we've got this actual guy who's made a commitment to sit in the House and represent us. Erin's turned it around. That's where I'll say I do respect the gamesmanship and political strategy he's done. He's turned that party around. He's moved them back towards a viable center-right party that is capable of winning elections, and politicians don't quit winning teams. Just a fact. So this little resurgence that the CPC is seeing right now, if anything, just means that the PPC's chances are not looking good in the future. Because dollars, like donor dollars, volunteers, strategists, pollsters, people like Phil who volunteer and work on campaigns and know the inner workings, they're not going to go volunteer with these other parties that they might have if they were frustrated. Because they're going, these guys actually got their shit together now. I might go work with them instead. So I don't think it's going anywhere. Think about that when you're voting too, because, I mean, it doesn't get better. The PPC does not. The polls for the PPC do not go up on the 21st. Let's put it that way. So think about that. So that's been Gunvote for the 15th of September. 5 days left, only 5 days, which means if you spend an hour every day between now and the election trying to get other people to understand what's at stake, be it your hunting buddies, be it your local gun shop guy, whatever, an hour, you'll only spend 5 hours. You won't even, it'll be like if everyone's done shift work, that'll be like a 4-hour shift plus the overtime your boss made you work. Like, it's nothing. So if everyone can do a little bit of that, that'd be tremendously beneficial. That would take the form of heading out and making sure of what party you need to vote for in your particular riding that will help keep that seat from the Liberals. For supporting Phil and his lovely contributions to these podcasts, that's heading over to ctcsupplies.ca and buying some gun stuff from him. Anything new coming in, by the way, that I need to have?
Do you want a Holosun Primary Arms ACSS Vulcan optic in green? We have those. Those are coming in next week.
What is a Vulcan optic?
It's like one of those RMR little mini red dots and stuff.
Oh, like the micro red dot MRDS type
Exactly.
dealies.
So we have the one with the ACSS, and it's coming in green. Should be here next week.
I thought it was like a mind meld sort of thing. Like, is it like it's just no?
No, sorry.
Bummer. When is the Romulan model coming out? Is there a Klingon one? Actually, if anyone's listening to this that works in the industry, make a Klingon thing.
Yeah, it'll work.
I swear that shit would sell. There's enough Trekkies in this world. For me, that's calibermag.ca/subscribe to get an annual subscription to the magazine that we produce, which is an actual paper magazine, which I know sounds anachronistic in 2021, but people still do read those things because eventually you get tired of scrolling. And register at gunvote.ca. We are sending out some emails this week for those that live in some battleground ridings. We'll be listing those, I think, probably tomorrow as we get into it. Not a ton there. But following the leaders' campaigns, basically, is the way it's shaping out. So, not surprising. Thank you for listening again. Hit subscribe, like, all that kind of stuff if you like. And we will see you guys tomorrow when there will be just 4 days left. That's right, just 4 days. So we find out what the future of gun ownership in Canada is, basically. Phil, thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure as always. And we will chat with you guys tomorrow. Adios.
Bye.